The moon hung low, casting silvery shadows through twisted apple branches, when a single gunshot shattered the silence of the night. Blood stained the dew-kissed grass, and in that fateful orchard, secrets began to unravel like fallen leaves. Welcome to the story of Miss Marple and the murder in the moonlit orchard. Grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and enjoy this suspenseful tale. If you're hooked, subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. Chapter 1. The Arrival in St. Mary. Mead in the quaint village of St. Mary Mead, where the days drifted by like lazy clouds over the English countryside. Life had a rhythm as predictable as the chiming of the church bells. The villagers went about their routines with the kind of quiet contentment that comes from knowing everyone's business without ever admitting it. Cottages with thatched roofs lined the narrow lanes, gardens bloomed with roses and lavender, and the air carried the faint scent of fresh-baked scones from Mrs. Price's kitchen. But on this particular autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, an undercurrent of unease stirred the air. Miss Jane Marple, the sharp-eyed spinster with a knack for unravelling the most tangled mysteries, sat in her cosy parlour by the window, knitting a soft woolen scarf while her mind wandered over the latest gossip from the village. Miss Marple was no ordinary elderly lady. At 74, with her white hair neatly pinned and her blue eyes twinkling behind spectacles, she possessed an intuition honed by years of observing human nature. She lived in a modest house called Danemead, surrounded by her cherished garden, where hollyhocks stood tall and proud. Her days were filled with simple pleasures, tending to her flowers, attending church services, and engaging in light conversation with her neighbours. Yet, beneath her gentle demeanour lay a mind as keen as a detective's, one that had assisted the police on more than one occasion. She often said that people were the same everywhere, greedy, passionate, foolish, and that the quiet villages held as many dark secrets as the bustling cities. On this evening, Miss Marple's peaceful routine was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was her nephew, Raymond West, a successful author known for his modern novels filled with psychological twists. Raymond was a tall, lanky man in his 40s, with a mop of unruly brown hair and a perpetual air of intellectual superiority. He burst into the room, his face flushed with excitement, carrying a small suitcase and a newspaper tucked under his arm. "Aunt Jane," he exclaimed, planting a kiss on her cheek. "I've come for a visit. London was getting too stuffy, and I thought a bit of country air might inspire my next book." Miss Marple smiled warmly, setting aside her knitting. "How lovely to see you, Raymond dear. Do sit down. I'll have Dolly make us some tea." Dolly Bantry, her longtime friend and occasional visitor, was not there that day, but Miss Marple's maid, the efficient young Florence, quickly prepared a tray with Earl Grey and biscuits. As they settled in, Raymond unfolded the newspaper and pointed to a small article buried on page 5. "Have you heard about the trouble at Orchard House? It's just on the edge of the village. Old Colonel Hargrove passed away last month, and now his estate is buzzing with relatives. Rumours of a disputed will, you know." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. She had indeed heard whispers at the Women's Institute meeting. Colonel Lucius Hargrove, a retired military man with a fortune from colonial investments, had lived reclusively in Orchard House, a sprawling manor surrounded by acres of apple orchards. His death from a sudden heart attack had seemed straightforward, but the arrival of his heirs had stirred up old family feuds. "Yes," she replied thoughtfully, sipping her tea. "The colonel was a stern man, from what I recall, His niece, Eliza, moved in to care for him in his last years. And there's his nephew, Victor, who runs that import business in London. Not to mention the distant cousin, Mrs. Lydia Forbes, who's always been fond of dramatics. Raymond leaned forward, his writerly instincts piqued. Exactly. And get this, there's talk of a midnight gathering in the orchard tonight. Some sort of family meeting under the full moon. Sounds positively gothic, doesn't it? I might sneak over and observe for inspiration. Miss Marple chuckled softly. Do be careful, Raymond. Moonlit orchards can hide more than just owls and foxes. As the evening deepened, the village settled into its nocturnal hush. Miss Marple retired to her bedroom upstairs, but sleep eluded her. She sat by the window, gazing out at the starry sky, her mind piecing together fragments of village chatter. Eliza Hargrove, the devoted niece, was a plain woman in her 30s, with mousy hair and a timid manner. But Miss Marple suspected a hidden strength beneath her quiet exterior. Victor Hargrove, on the other hand, was flashy and ambitious, always dressed in sharp suits and driving a sleek motor car. He had visited the Colonel sporadically, often leaving with heated arguments echoing through the manor. Then there was Lydia Forbes, a widow in her 50s, known for her sharp tongue and love of gin. She claimed a share of the estate through a convoluted family tree, and her visits to Orchard House had increased in frequency after the Colonel's health declined. A clock struck 11, and Miss Marple decided on a whim to take a stroll. Bundling up in her woolen shawl, she slipped out into the crisp night air. The path to Orchard House wound through hedgerows and past the old mill, where the river gurgled softly. As she approached the estate, the orchard came into view, a vast expanse of apple trees heavy with fruit, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. The full moon bathed everything in an ethereal light, turning the scene into something out of a fairy tale, or perhaps a nightmare. From the shadows near the gate, Miss Marple watched as figures gathered in a clearing at the heart of the orchard. There was Eliza, wringing her hands nervously, Victor, pacing with a cigarette in hand, and Lydia, seated on a stone bench with a flask at her side. A fourth person joined them, a tall, stern-faced lawyer named Mr. Reginald Poole, who carried a briefcase and adjusted his glasses as he addressed the group. As per the Colonel's instructions, he intoned in a dry voice, we meet here tonight to discuss the codicil to his will. He believed the moonlight would bring clarity to family matters. The discussion began cordially enough, with Mr. Poole reading from a document about bequests and conditions. But tensions simmered beneath the surface. Victor argued vehemently about his entitlement to the import shares, claiming the Colonel had promised them verbally. He owed me that much after all I've done, he snapped. Eliza whispered protests, her voice trembling. Uncle was clear, the house goes to me for my caregiving. Lydia laughed bitterly. And what about me? I've got letters proving my claim. Without me, this family would have forgotten its roots. Miss Marple, hidden behind a thick trunk, listened intently. Human nature, she mused, was like an orchard, fruitful on the surface, but prone to rot if not tended. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the night. A gunshot, unmistakable and close. The group froze, then chaos erupted. Eliza screamed, Victor shouted, and Lydia dropped her flask. In the moonlit clearing, a body slumped to the ground. Mr. Poole, the lawyer, with a bullet wound in his chest, his briefcase spilling papers like autumn leaves. Victor was the first to react, rushing to the fallen man. He's dead. Who did this? Eliza backed away, her face pale as the moon. Lydia stammered, I saw a shadow over there." But as they argued and pointed fingers, Miss Marple slipped away quietly, her mind already whirring with possibilities. Who had motive? The will's codicil, perhaps hidden in those papers, could change everything. And why the orchard at midnight? It smacked of deliberate staging. Back at Danemead, Miss Marple poured herself another cup of tea, her knitting forgotten. Raymond, who had followed her discreetly and witnessed the horror from afar, burst in moments later. "Aunt Jane, did you hear that shot? There's been a murder." She nodded calmly. "Yes, dear. Poor Mr. Poole. It seems our quiet village has a killer in its midst." As the police sirens wailed in the distance, summoned by a frantic call from Orchard House, Miss Marple pondered the clues. The gunshot had come from the direction of the old well, hidden among the trees. Victor's cigarette butt lay near the body. Had he been too quick to approach? Eliza's hands trembled not just from shock, but perhaps guilt. And Lydia's flask, could it hold more than gin? The moonlit orchard held its secrets tight, but Miss Marple knew that with patience they would unravel. This shocking event set the stage for a web of deception that would entangle the entire village. But for now, as the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon, Miss Marple retired to bed, her thoughts already turning to the suspects' alibis and the hidden motives lurking in the shadows. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a puzzle that would test even her legendary insight. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Suspicion. The morning after the murder dawned crisp and golden, with sunlight filtering through the mist that clung to St. Mary Mead's cobblestone streets. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, a plate of buttered toast and marmalade before her, but her appetite was overshadowed by the puzzle of the previous night. The village was abuzz with whispers, and the local constable, P.C. Harris, had already cordoned off the orchard at Orchard House. News of Mr. Poole's death had spread like wildfire, and every villager seemed to have a theory, from a vengeful ghost to a poacher's misfired shot. Miss Marple, however, knew better than to trust idle speculation. She sipped her tea, her mind sifting through the faces she'd seen in the moonlight, each one a potential piece in the deadly game. By mid-morning, she decided to visit the village post office, a hub of gossip where she could glean more about the Hargrove family without arousing suspicion. The post office was a small cluttered shop run by Miss Clara Tibbs, a wiry woman with a knack for remembering every letter and parcel that passed through her hands. As Miss Marple entered, the bell above the door jingled and Clara looked up, from sorting envelopes. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she said, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Terrible business at Orchard House, isn't it? Poor Mr. Poole, shot dead like that. They say the family's in an uproar." Miss Marple nodded, selecting a few stamps from the counter. "Quite shocking, Clara. I suppose you've heard plenty about the Hargroves lately." Clara leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Oh, yes. That Victor's been sending telegrams to London, urgent ones, mind you. And Eliza, she's been getting letters from a solicitor. Not Mr. Poole, mind, but someone from out of town. As for Mrs. Forbes, she's been ordering bottles of gin by the crate, delivered straight to the manor." This tidbit about the solicitor intrigued Miss Marple. She tucked it away, thanked Clara, and stepped outside, where the village green was alive with activity. Children played near the duck pond, and a group of women whispered outside the bakery. Among them was Mrs. Dolly Bantry, Miss Marple's old friend, who hurried over with a look of barely contained excitement. "Jane, you must come to tea this afternoon," Dolly insisted. "Arthur's been talking to the inspector, and there's news about the murder. You'll want to hear it." At 3 o'clock, Miss Marple arrived at Bantry Hall, Dolly's grand, but slightly faded manor. Over a pot of Darjeeling and cucumber sandwiches, Dolly shared what her husband, Colonel Bantry, had learned from Inspector Craddock, a young but capable officer from the county police. "They found the gun," Dolly said, her eyes wide. "A revolver, hidden in the brambles near the old well in the orchard. No fingerprints, of course. The killer must have wiped it clean. But here's the odd part. It's a military issue, the kind Lucius Hargrove used in his army days." Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked steadily as she listened. A military revolver suggested a connection to the late colonel, but why would it surface now? "What else did the inspector say?" she asked. Dolly leaned in. "They're questioning the family, but no one's talking. Victor claims he was lighting a cigarette when the shot rang out. Eliza says she was too shocked to notice anything, and Lydia swears she saw a stranger lurking near the trees. Craddock thinks one of them is lying, but he can't prove it yet." After tea, Miss Marple decided to take a closer look at Orchard House herself. She walked the familiar path, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel, until she reached the manor's iron gates. The orchard was still sealed off with police tape, but the house itself was accessible. She knocked, and a flustered Eliza opened. The door. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, her voice trembling. "It's awful, isn't it? Poor Mr. Poole. I can't believe this happened." Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying, but Miss Marple noted a certain stiffness in her posture, like someone guarding a secret. "May I come in, dear?" Miss Marple asked gently. Eliza hesitated, then led her into the drawing room, where heavy drapes cast long shadows across mahogany furniture. The air smelled of polish and something faintly metallic. Victor was there, sprawled in an armchair with a glass of whiskey, his tie loosened. Lydia sat by the fireplace, fanning, herself with a magazine, her lipstick slightly smudged. The tension in the room was palpable, as if each person expected the others to pounce. "I thought I'd offer my condolences," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair, "and perhaps see if there's anything I can do." Victor snorted. "Unless you can bring back Poole or find that blasted codicil, I doubt it." Lydia shot him a venomous look. "Don't be crude, Victor. The codicil's probably nonsense anyway. Lucius was half mad in his final days." Eliza wrung her hands. "It's real, I know it is. He told me he'd hidden it somewhere safe to protect us." Miss Marple's ears pricked up. A hidden codicil. This was new. She kept her expression neutral, asking, "Did Mr. Poole mention where it might be?" Eliza shook her head. "He was about to read it when it happened." Victor slammed his glass down. "If you ask me, someone didn't want it read, and I'll bet it's one of you two." Lydia laughed shrilly. "Don't look at me, darling. I was too busy dodging your cigarette ash to shoot anyone." Sensing the conversation was turning volatile, Miss Marple excused herself, promising to return with a casserole, a classic village pretext for further visits. As she left, she noticed a small detail. A muddy footprint on the doorstep, too large to belong to Eliza or Lydia, and not quite matching Victor's polished shoes. It led toward the orchard, then vanished into the grass. Curious, she thought, filing it away. Back at Danemead, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her mind racing. The revolver's military origin pointed to the Hargrove family's past, but whose hand had pulled the trigger? Victor's temper suggested impulsiveness, yet his alibi of lighting a cigarette seemed too convenient. Eliza's nervous demeanour could hide guilt or simply fear, and Lydia's sharp wit might mask a cunning plan. And then there was the stranger Lydia claimed to have seen, real or a fabrication to deflect suspicion. As twilight fell, Raymond arrived, his notebook brimming with scribbled ideas. "Aunt Jane, I've been talking to the villagers. There's a rumor that Colonel Hargrove kept a locked box in his study, something he never let anyone touch. Could it hold the codicil?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps, dear, but we must tread carefully. A locked box is one thing, a locked heart is quite another." The village clock chimed, and Miss Marple knew the answers lay not just in physical clues, but in the tangled motives of those in the orchard. The revolver, the footprint, the hidden codicil, they were threads in a tapestry she was only beginning to weave. As she prepared for bed, she resolved to visit Orchard House again, to probe deeper into the family's secrets. The murderer was close, she could feel it, and St. Mary Mead was no longer the sleepy haven it seemed. Chapter 3. The Locked Box. The sun climbed higher over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper secrets of their own. Miss Jane Marple, refreshed after a modest breakfast of porridge and tea, felt the familiar tingle of curiosity urging her forward. The village was still reeling from the murder, with neighbours exchanging hushed theories over garden fences. But Miss Marple's focus was on Orchard House and the tantalising hint of a locked box in Colonel Hargrove's study. If it held the codicil, it might reveal why Mr. Poole had met such a grim fate. With her straw hat firmly in place and a basket of freshly baked scones as her excuse, she set off toward the manor, determined to uncover more. Orchard House loomed, at the edge of the village, its ivy-clad walls and tall chimneys giving it an air of faded grandeur. The orchard, still cordoned off by police tape, was quiet now, the apple trees standing like silent witnesses to the crime. Miss Marple knocked, and this time Victor answered, his face drawn and unshaven, a stark contrast to his usual polished demeanour. "Miss Marple," he said gruffly, stepping aside. "Eliza's in the kitchen, crying again. Lydia's upstairs, probably nursing a hangover. What do you want?" His bluntness didn't faze her. She smiled sweetly. "Just a neighbourly visit, dear. I brought scones. Might I have a word with Eliza?" Victor shrugged and led her to the kitchen, where Eliza was kneading dough with a vigour that suggested she was working out more than just bread. Flour dusted her apron, and her eyes were puffy, but she managed a weak smile. "Oh, Miss Marple, how kind of you. It's been so dreadful." Miss Marple set the basket down, her gaze softening. "I can only imagine, dear. I heard the Colonel kept a study here. Might I see it? I've always admired a well-kept library." It was a gentle ruse, and Eliza, too distracted to question. It nodded. "It's just through there. Mind the clutter. No one's touched it since Uncle passed." The study was a dimly lit room, heavy with the scent of old leather and pipe tobacco. Bookshelves lined the walls, stuffed with military histories and dusty ledgers. A large oak desk dominated the centre, its surface cluttered with papers. An inkwell and a tarnished brass paperweight shaped like a cannon. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the room, landing on a small iron-bound box tucked beneath a side table. It was no bigger than a bread box, with a sturdy padlock that gleamed dully in the light. She knelt to examine it, careful not to touch. The lock was new, unmarred by scratches, suggesting it hadn't been tampered with. Yet. "Eliza," Miss Marple called softly, "do you know what's in this box?" Eliza appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Uncle's private things, I suppose. He never let me near it. Said it was for family matters." Her voice wavered, and Miss Marple noted the way her fingers twisted the cloth. "Did Mr. Poole ever mention it?" she pressed. Eliza shook her head. Not directly, but he asked about Uncle's papers the day before the orchard. Her voice broke, and she excused herself, leaving Miss Marple alone with her thoughts as she lingered. Victor entered, his eyes narrowing. "Snooping, are you?" he said, but there was a trace of amusement in his tone. "That box is a family myth, probably just old medals or love letters from the Colonel's youth." Miss Marple stood, brushing her skirt. "Perhaps, but myths often hide truths, don't they?" Victor's smile faded, and he turned away, muttering about business in London. His unease was palpable, and Miss Marple wondered if he knew more about the box than he let on. Leaving the study, she wandered into the garden, where she found Lydia pruning roses with a pair of shears. The widow's hands were steady, but her eyes were bloodshot, and a faint whiff of gin clung to her. "Miss Marple," Lydia said, snipping a stem with unnecessary force, "come to play detective. I told the police everything. Saw a shadow, heard the shot. End of story." Her tone was defiant, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of nervousness. "A shadow can mean many things," she replied calmly. "A stranger, perhaps, or someone closer to home." Lydia's shears paused mid-air, then resumed their work. "You're too clever for this village," she said, but offered nothing more. On her way back to Danemead, Miss Marple stopped by the churchyard, where the vicar, Mr. Clement, was tending to the roses around the graves. He was a kind, absent-minded man in his 60s, with a habit of noticing things others missed. "Miss Marple," he greeted, "terrible business, this murder. I saw Victor arguing with Mr. Poole in the lane last week. Something about money. And Eliza, poor girl. She's been leaving flowers on the Colonel's grave daily, like she's seeking forgiveness." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind turning over this new detail. Guilt, grief, or something else? Back home, she settled into her armchair, her knitting untouched as she pondered. The locked box was a tantalizing clue, but without a key, it remained a mystery. Victor's argument with Poole suggested financial motives, perhaps debts or a contested inheritance. Eliza's devotion to the Colonel's memory could hide a deeper loyalty or a secret she feared would surface. Lydia's shadow story felt rehearsed, and her drinking might be more than a vice. And then there was the revolver, military in make, possibly from the Colonel's collection. Could someone have taken it from the house? As the afternoon waned, Raymond burst in, his face alight with news. "Aunt Jane, I overheard the postman talking. A week before the murder, a package arrived for Mr. Poole at the inn where he was staying. Small, heavy, wrapped in brown paper. No one knows what was in it." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A package could mean evidence, a weapon, or even the codicil itself. "Thank you, Raymond," she said. "Tomorrow, I think we'll pay a visit to the inn." The day drew to a close with St. Mary Mead, settling into its evening calm, but Miss Marple knew the surface peace was deceptive. The locked box, the revolver, the shadow, the package, these were pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a calculated crime. Someone in the Hargrove family, or perhaps an outsider, had orchestrated Poole's death, and the truth was buried somewhere in the manor's shadowed halls. As she sipped her bedtime cocoa, Miss Marple felt the threads of the mystery tightening, pulling her toward the heart of the darkness that had taken root in the moonlit orchard. Chapter 4. The Inn's Secret. The morning air in St. Mary Mead carried a chill that hinted at autumn's deepening grip, and Miss Jane Marple wrapped her shawl tighter as she walked toward the Blue Boar Inn. The village was quieter today, as if the shock of the murder had settled into a wary hush. Her destination was the cosy inn where Mr. Poole had stayed before his untimely death, a place known for its warm hearth and the landlord's knack for overhearing snippets of conversation. Miss Marple's goal was to learn more about the mysterious package Raymond had mentioned, hoping it might shed light on the lawyer's final days and the motive behind his murder. The Blue Boar was a low-beamed building with a creaking sign and windows that glowed with lamplight even in daylight. Inside, the air smelled of ale and freshly baked bread. Mr. Baxter, the landlord, a stout man with a ruddy face and a perpetual smile, was polishing glasses behind the bar. "Miss Marple, what a surprise!" he greeted, setting down his cloth. "Come for a cuppa. Or is it the gossip about poor Mr. Poole?" She smiled, easing onto a stool. "A bit of both, Mr. Baxter. I heard Mr. Poole received a package here, before the tragedy. Do you recall anything about it?" Baxter's eyes lit up, eager to share. "Oh, aye. Came about a week ago, it did. Small, wrapped in brown paper, addressed to Poole in a spidery hand. He was right fussy about it, snatched it up quick and took it to his room. Didn't say what it was, but he looked nervy, like he was expecting trouble." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Did he have any visitors? Anyone who might have known about it?" Baxter leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Funny you ask. That Victor Hargrove came by one evening, all bluster and charm. They talked in the corner, voices low, but I caught a bit about papers and promises. Didn't sound friendly." This confirmed the vicar's account of Victor's argument with Poole, and Miss Marple tucked the detail away. She thanked Baxter, promising to return for his famous shepherd's pie, and stepped outside to consider her next move. The inn was just a short walk from the village square, where the weekly market was in full swing. Stalls brimmed with apples, cheeses and knitted goods, and villagers bartered with cheerful banter. Among them was Mrs. Marge Simpson, the inn's housekeeper, a plump woman with a sharp eye for detail. Miss Marple approached her, basket in hand, and struck up a conversation about the weather before steering it to Poole. "Oh, Mr. Poole was a quiet one," Marge said, adjusting her bonnet. "Kept to himself mostly, but I cleaned his room daily. That package you're asking about, he hid it under the floorboard beneath his bed. I saw him lift the board once, when he thought I wasn't looking. Looked like a metal case, small enough to fit in a pocket." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. A hidden case. It could hold the codicil, or something else entirely. Perhaps a clue to the killer's identity. "Did you see him with anyone else?" she asked. Marge frowned. "Not in his room, but I saw Eliza Hargrove lingering outside the inn one evening, looking like she wanted to go in, but didn't dare." This was new. Eliza, timid and reserved, sneaking around the inn? Miss Marple thanked Marge and made her way back toward Danemead, her mind buzzing. The package, now possibly a metal case, was a tangible lead, but Poole's room had likely been searched by the police. She needed to confirm whether the case was still there. Enlisting Raymond's help, she sent him to charm P.C. Harris into letting them inspect the room, under the guise of Miss Marple misplacing a shawl during a prior visit to the inn. By afternoon they were granted access. Poole's room was small, with a single bed, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking the orchard. Raymond, ever enthusiastic, knelt to check the floorboards, while Miss Marple examined the desk. The board under the bed was loose, just as Marge had described, but when Raymond pried it up, the space beneath was empty. "Nothing here, Aunt Jane," he said, disappointed. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the room, landing on a faint scratch on the windowsill. It was fresh, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. "Someone's been here," she murmured. "And recently." They left the inn, and Miss Marple decided to revisit Orchard House, hoping to catch the family off guard. When she arrived, Lydia was in the parlour, reading a novel with a glass of gin at her elbow. "Back again," Lydia said, arching an eyebrow. "You're persistent, I'll give you that." Miss Marple smiled. "I wondered if you'd remembered anything more about that shadow you saw. It might help the police." Lydia's expression hardened. "I told them what I saw. A figure, tall, near the trees. Could have been anyone. This village is full of busybodies." Her defensiveness was telling, and Miss Marple wondered if Lydia was protecting someone, or herself. Before leaving, Miss Marple asked to use the telephone, a pretext to linger near the study. As Lydia led her to the hall, she noticed a small key on a chain around Lydia's neck, half hidden by her scarf. It was an unusual accessory for a woman who favoured gaudy jewellery. Could it fit the locked box? Filing this away, Miss Marple returned home, where Raymond was waiting with a fresh discovery. "I talked to the station master," he said excitedly. "Poole bought a train ticket to London the day before he died, but he never used it. Planned to leave, maybe?" Miss Marple sat by her fire, her thoughts weaving a new pattern. The empty hiding place, the scratched windowsill, Eliza's lurking, Lydia's key, Victor's argument, Poole's unused ticket. These were not random threads, but part of a deliberate design. Someone had taken the case, perhaps knowing its contents could unravel the Hargrove fortune. The murderer, she sensed, was growing bolder, and the truth was closer than ever. As dusk settled over the village, casting Orchard House in a soft glow, Miss Marple knew her next step was to uncover what Poole had been so desperate to protect. The inn had given up one secret, but others waited, hidden in the shadows of St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes. Chapter 5. The Hidden Letter. The afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a warm golden light, but Miss Jane Marple felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The empty hiding place under the floorboard at the Blue Boar Inn suggested someone had beaten her to the mysterious metal case, and the scratched windowsill hinted at a stealthy exit. Her mind churned with questions. Had the case contained the elusive codicil, and who had been desperate enough to steal it? With her basket tucked under her arm, she decided to return to the heart of the village, where the Women's Institute meeting at the church hall offered a chance to gather more threads of the mystery. The hall was a hive of activity, with tables laden with homemade jams and knitted scarves for the autumn fair. Miss Marple slipped in quietly, her presence barely noticed among the chatter of village women. She joined a group near the tea urn, where Mrs. Price, the baker's wife, was holding court. "It's a scandal," Mrs. Price declared, her cheeks flushed. "That Eliza Hargrove was seen at the post office yesterday, posting a letter in a right hurry. Looked guilty as sin, if you ask me." Miss Marple's ears pricked up. A letter? It could be nothing, or it could be everything. Feigning interest in a jar of gooseberry jam, Miss Marple gently probed. "A letter, you say? Did Clara mention where it was addressed?" Mrs. Price leaned in, eager to share. "London," she said. "Thick envelope, too, like it held more than a note. Clara reckoned it was to a solicitor, but Eliza wouldn't say a word." This aligned with Clara Tibbs's earlier comment about Eliza receiving letters from an out-of-town solicitor. Miss Marple thanked Mrs. Price and made a mental note to revisit. The post office later, her next stop was the vicarage, where Mr. Clement, the vicar, was pruning his apple tree. His gentle demeanour made him an ideal confidant, and Miss Marple knew he often saw things others overlooked. "Good day, Mr. Clement," she greeted, pausing by the gate. "I've been thinking about poor Mr. Poole. Did he ever visit the church before the tragedy?" The vicar set down his shears, wiping his brow. "Funny you mention it. He came by the day before he died, asking about the Hargrove family plot. Wanted to know if the Colonel had left anything there. Papers, perhaps. I told him the plot was just graves. Nothing else." This was intriguing. Why would Poole think the Colonel had hidden something in the family plot? Miss Marple thanked the vicar and headed toward the churchyard, her steps slow but purposeful. The Hargrove plot was a quiet corner shaded by yews, with weathered headstones marking generations of the family. She examined the Colonel's grave, its fresh earth still settling. A small bunch of wilted roses, likely from Eliza, lay at its base. Nothing seemed amiss, but as she turned to leave, her foot brushed against a loose stone near the grave. It shifted slightly, revealing a shallow hollow beneath. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased, sealed with wax. Heart quickening, Miss Marple carefully retrieved the paper, glancing around to ensure she was alone. The wax bore the Colonel's initials, LH. She slipped it into her basket, deciding to examine it at home. Back at Danemead, she settled at her desk, lit a lamp and broke the seal. The paper was a single sheet, written in the Colonel's precise hand. It wasn't the codicil, but a letter dated a month before his death, addressed to Mr. Poole. It read, "Reginald, I've hidden the codicil where only the loyal will look. The orchard holds the key, but beware, my family's greed runs deep. Trust no one until the truth is safe." Miss Marple's breath caught. The Colonel had anticipated trouble, perhaps even his own death. The orchard again? Did it mean the trees, the well, or something else? And who was the loyal? Eliza, who cared for him, or someone unexpected? The letter raised more questions than it answered, but it confirmed the codicil's existence and its importance. She tucked the letter into her desk drawer, locking it securely. Raymond arrived soon after, his face alight with his latest discovery. "Aunt Jane, I spoke to the station master again. He remembered something odd. Lydia was at the station the night before the murder, buying a ticket to Bristol, but she never boarded the train. Why buy a ticket and not use it?" Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Lydia's movements were increasingly suspicious, especially with that key around her neck. Was she planning to flee, or was the ticket a diversion? Determined to press further, Miss Marple decided to confront Lydia directly. She returned to Orchard House, where Lydia was in the conservatory, repotting geraniums with a distracted air. "Mrs. Forbes," Miss Marple began, her tone gentle but firm, "I couldn't help but notice your lovely key necklace. Is it a family heirloom?" Lydia's hand flew to the chain, her smile tight. "Just a trinket, Miss Marple. Nothing special." But her eyes darted away, and Miss Marple sensed she'd struck a nerve. "I see," she said. "I only ask because the Colonel was fond of locks and secrets, wasn't he?" Lydia's face paled, and she excused herself abruptly, claiming a headache. Miss Marple left the manor, her mind racing. The letter, the unused train tickets, Lydia's key, Eliza's hurried letter to London. These were pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a calculated plan. Someone in the Hargrove family had known about the codicil and wanted it silenced, along with Mr. Poole. The orchard, the Colonel's cryptic words suggested, held the final clue. As evening fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, watching the moon rise over St. Mary Mead. The village seemed peaceful, but she knew the calm was a facade. The hidden letter had brought her closer to the truth, but danger lingered. Whoever had taken the metal case was still out there, and they might strike again to protect their secret. Tomorrow, she resolved, she would return to the orchard, searching for the key the Colonel had mentioned, and perhaps uncover the heart of the mystery that had turned a moonlit night into a scene of death. Chapter 6. The Orchard's Whisper. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a soft mist that clung to the rooftops, lending the village an air of quiet mystery. Miss Jane Marple, fortified by a simple breakfast of tea and toast, felt the weight of the Colonel's letter in her thoughts. Its cryptic reference to the orchard as the key to the codicil gnawed at her, urging her to return to the scene of the crime. The police tape around Orchard House's apple trees had been removed as Inspector Craddock's team had finished their initial sweep, leaving the orchard open for her discreet investigation. Armed with her umbrella and a small notebook, she set out, determined to uncover what the Colonel had hidden in the moonlit grove. The orchard was a labyrinth of gnarled trees, their branches heavy with late-season apples that glowed faintly in the morning light. Miss Marple moved carefully, her eyes scanning the ground for anything out of place. The clearing where Mr. Poole had been shot was marked by trampled grass, but the old well tucked among the trees drew her attention. It was an ancient stone structure, its mouth covered by a weathered wooden lid. The Colonel's letter had spoken of loyalty and a key, and wells, she mused, were often places of secrets in old tales. Kneeling beside it, she examined the lid, noting fresh scratches around the iron handle, as if it had been recently opened. With some effort, she lifted the lid, peering into the dark shaft. The air was damp, and a faint echo suggested depth. Using her umbrella, she probed gently, feeling for anything unusual. Her hook caught on something metallic, and with careful maneuvering, she retrieved a small, rusted tin box, no larger than a biscuit tin, tied shut with twine. Her heart quickened. This could be the hiding place the Colonel meant. She tucked the tin into her basket, covering it with a cloth, and replaced the lid, ensuring the well looked undisturbed. Back at Danemead, Miss Marple sat at her kitchen table, the tin before her. The twine was brittle, snapping easily, but the lid was stuck, sealed by years of rust. She fetched a butter knife and pried it open, revealing a folded document inside, yellowed but intact. It was the codicil, written in the Colonel's hand, and signed with his flourish. It declared that Orchard House and its orchards were to go to Eliza, provided she remained in St. Mary Mead for 5 years after his death to preserve the family's legacy. The import business shares, however, were to be divided equally among Eliza, Victor, and Lydia, but only if they agreed to manage it jointly. A final clause noted that any attempt to contest the codicil would forfeit the challenger's share. This was explosive. The conditions would bind the family together, something none of them seemed inclined to do. Victor's ambition, Lydia's disdain, and even Eliza's quiet loyalty could have sparked desperation to suppress this document. But who had known it existed? And why kill Poole to keep it secret? Miss Marple locked the codicil in her desk alongside the Colonel's letter, knowing it was too dangerous to reveal yet. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Dolly Bantry, her face flushed with news. "Jane, you won't believe this," she said, settling into the parlour. Arthur heard from Inspector Craddock that they found a cigarette case near the well, silver, engraved with Victor's initials. He claims he lost it weeks ago, but it's awfully convenient, don't you think? Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Victor's cigarette butt had been near Poole's body, and now his case was at the well. Was he careless, or was someone framing him? Determined to test the family's reactions, Miss Marple visited Orchard House that afternoon, bringing a jar of her homemade chutney as a pretext. Eliza was in the drawing room, mending a shawl, her hands steady but her face pale. Victor was absent, reportedly in London on business, but Lydia lounged on a sofa, flipping through a fashion magazine. "Miss Marple," Lydia drawled, "you're becoming a fixture here. What's the occasion?" Miss Marple smiled. "Just checking on you all, dear. I heard the police found something in the orchard. A cigarette case. Curious, isn't it?" Lydia's magazine froze mid-turn, but she recovered quickly. Victor's always losing things. Probably dropped it during one of his tantrums. Eliza, however, flinched, her needle pausing. "Victor wouldn't. He's not like that," she said softly. Miss Marple noted the defensiveness in her tone. Was Eliza protecting her cousin, or did she know something about the case? Before she could probe further, the telephone rang, and Eliza hurried to answer it, leaving Miss Marple alone with Lydia. Seizing the moment, Miss Marple leaned closer. "That key around your neck, Mrs. Forbes. It's quite striking. Does it open something special?" Lydia's hand instinctively touched the chain, her smile tight. "Just a memento, nothing more." But her voice was sharp, and she stood abruptly, muttering about needing air. Miss Marple watched her go, convinced the key was significant, perhaps not for the tin box but for something else in the manor. As she left Orchard House, Miss Marple encountered Raymond, who had been chatting with P.C. Harris near the gate. "Aunt Jane, you'll want to hear this," he said, pulling her aside. "The police tested the revolver for residue. It's been fired recently, but the bullet they dug out of Poole doesn't match perfectly. Craddock thinks there might have been 2 guns in the orchard that night." 2 guns? The plot thickened, suggesting either a second shooter or a clever ruse to confuse the investigation. Back home, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting idle as she pieced together the clues. The codicil's terms explained the motive. Greed, control, or resentment could drive any of the Hargroves to murder. Victor's cigarette case and butt placed him at the scene, but his absence today felt strategic. Eliza's protectiveness hinted at loyalty or fear, and Lydia's key suggested she held a secret of her own. The possibility of a second gun opened a new angle, perhaps an outsider, or a conspiracy within the family. As the village clock struck evening, Miss Marple knew the codicil was the heart of the mystery, but revealing it now could endanger her. The orchard had whispered its secret, but the killer was still at large, watching and waiting. Tomorrow, she decided, she would dig deeper into Victor's movements and Lydia's key, determined to unravel the tangled web before another life was lost in the moonlit shadows of St. Mary Mead. Chapter 7. The London Connection. The morning mist had burned away, leaving St. Mary Mead bathed in a crisp autumn glow, but Miss Jane Marple's thoughts were far from the serene village. The discovery of the codicil in the orchard's well had confirmed the stakes of the murder, and the possibility of a second gun raised the spectre of a deeper conspiracy. Victor's absence in London, coupled with his cigarette case found near the well, made him a focal point of suspicion. Miss Marple decided to follow this thread, sensing that his city dealings might reveal why Mr. Poole had been silenced. With her trusty hat and a small satchel, she enlisted Raymond to accompany her to the train station, determined to uncover what Victor was hiding. The train to London was a rattling affair, filled with villagers heading to market and businessmen, in stiff collars. Miss Marple sat by the window, her eyes tracing the rolling fields as she considered her approach. Victor's import business, Hargrove and Sons, dealt in exotic goods, spices, silks, and rare artifacts from the colonies. If he was in financial trouble, as his argument with Poole suggested, his office might hold clues. Raymond, ever eager for adventure, had secured the address from a village gossip who'd seen Victor's business card. "It's in a posh part of town, Aunt Jane," he said, flipping through his notebook. "But I hear it's been struggling lately. Bad deals, unpaid debts." Arriving in London, they navigated the bustling streets to a narrow building near Covent Garden, its sign, reading Hargrove and Sons Imports. The office was cramped, with shelves of dusty ledgers and crates of unpacked goods. A young clerk, nervous and bespectacled, greeted them. "Mr. Victor's not in," he stammered. "He's at a meeting with creditors." Miss Marple smiled reassuringly. "We're old friends from St. Mary Mead. Might we look around? I've always been curious about his work." The clerk hesitated, then nodded, distracted by a ringing telephone. Miss Marple's keen eyes scanned the room. Papers were strewn across a desk, including invoices marked overdue and a letter from a bank threatening foreclosure. Among the clutter, she spotted a photograph of Victor with an older man, both standing beside a crate labelled Calcutta. The man's face was unfamiliar, but his military bearing and the faint scar on his cheek suggested a past not unlike Colonel Hargrove's. She slipped the photograph into her satchel, noting the clerk's obliviousness. Raymond, meanwhile, rifled through a drawer and whispered, "Aunt Jane, look at this." He held up a telegram dated 2 days before the murder, sent to Victor from an unknown sender. "Poole knows too much. Meet me at the usual place." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. This was no coincidence. Victor had been warned about Poole, perhaps by someone with a stake in the codicil's suppression. She tucked the telegram away, thanking the clerk as they left. Back in St. Mary Mead by evening, Miss Marple visited Dolly Bantry to share her findings. Over tea, Dolly revealed a fresh tidbit from Colonel Bantry's police contacts. "They traced a call made from Orchard House the night of the murder," she said, her eyes wide. "It went to a London number, but the line's disconnected now. Craddock thinks it was Victor arranging something." Miss Marple nodded, the telegram's cryptic message echoing in her mind. Victor's financial woes and the warning about Poole pointed to a motive, but the scarred man in the photograph suggested an outside player. Determined to confront Victor, Miss Marple returned to Orchard House, where she found him in the drawing room, packing a suitcase. His face was haggard, his suit rumpled. "Miss Marple," he said, startled. "I'm heading back to London. Business calls." She fixed him with a steady gaze. "Business or trouble? I heard about your creditors, Victor, and a telegram warning you about Mr. Poole. Care to explain?" His jaw tightened, but he forced a laugh. "You've been busy, haven't you? That telegram was nothing, just a client's paranoia. As for Poole, he was meddling in things he didn't understand." Miss Marple pressed further. "And the cigarette case by the well? Lost, you said?" Victor's eyes flashed. "I told the police. I misplaced it weeks ago. Someone's trying to pin this on me." His defensiveness was telling. But before she could probe, Eliza entered, her face anxious. "Victor, you can't leave now. The police want to question you again." He brushed her off, slamming his suitcase shut and storming out, leaving Miss Marple with a sense of unease. As she walked home, the village was settling into twilight, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke. Miss Marple's thoughts turned, to the photograph's scarred man. Was he the shadow Lydia claimed to have seen, or a partner in Victor's schemes? The telegram suggested someone else knew about the codicil, someone with enough influence to orchestrate a murder. And what of Eliza's protectiveness? Was she shielding Victor or hiding her own role? At Danemead, Raymond was waiting, his excitement barely contained. "Aunt Jane, I asked around at the pub. A stranger was seen in the village the day before. The murder, tall, with a scar on his cheek, just like that photo. He was asking about Orchard House." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was far from complete. Victor's trip to London, the telegram, the scarred stranger, they pointed to a web that stretched beyond St. Mary Mead. As the moon rose, casting its familiar glow over the orchard, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the photograph and telegram before her. The killer was close, she could feel it, and the London connection had tightened the noose. Tomorrow, she would dig into the scarred man's identity, certain he held the key to unravelling the murder in the moonlit orchard. Chapter 8. The Scarred Stranger. The autumn breeze swept through St. Mary Mead, rustling the leaves as Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, the photograph of the scarred man and the cryptic telegram weighing heavily on her mind. The stranger's presence in the village, coupled with Victor's hasty trips to London, suggested a conspiracy that reached beyond the Hargrove family. The codicil, safely locked in her desk, was the prize, but the scarred man was a new thread in the tapestry, one that could unravel the motive behind Mr. Poole's murder. Determined to identify him, Miss Marple decided to start at the village pub, where strangers were noticed and tongues loosened easily over a pint. The Black Swan was a cosy, low-ceilinged establishment, its walls adorned with horse brasses and faded photographs of village life. Miss Marple entered, her unassuming presence drawing little attention from the regulars. She approached the bar, where Mr. Tompkins, the publican, was wiping down the counter. "Good morning, Mr. Tompkins," she said, her voice warm. "I heard a visitor was in the village recently. A tall man with a scar on his cheek. Did he stop by here?" Tompkins paused, his cloth still. "Aye, he did. 2 nights before the murder, sat in that corner booth, nursing a whiskey. Kept to himself, but he asked about the Hargroves, Orchard House specifically. Paid in cash and left quick." Miss Marple's interest deepened. "Did he mention a name or where he was from?" Tompkins shook his head. "Not a word, but he had a city look, sharp suit, polished boots. Not the sort we see often round here." She thanked him, her mind turning to the photograph. The man's military bearing and scar suggested a connection to Colonel Hargrove's past, perhaps, from his colonial days. But why was he asking about Orchard House? And how did he know Victor? Her next stop was the village hall, where the Women's Institute was preparing for the autumn fair. Among the bustle of jam jars and crochet, Miss Marple found Mrs. Clara Tibbs, the postmistress, sorting raffle tickets. "Clara, dear," she began, "you see everyone's comings and goings. Did you notice a stranger in the village recently, perhaps at the post office?" Clara's eyes lit up. "Oh, yes. A tall man, scar on his cheek, posted a letter to London the day before poor Mr. Poole was shot. Didn't say much, but I saw him talking to Victor outside the shop, looking right serious." This confirmed the stranger's link to Victor, and Miss Marple's thoughts raced. The telegram warning Victor about Poole, the stranger's inquiries, and the photograph all pointed to a coordinated effort. She needed to know more about the man's identity. Returning to Danemead, she telephoned her old friend, Sir Henry Clithering, a retired Scotland Yard commissioner who often indulged her sleuthing. "Henry," she said, describing the scarred man, "can you check your contacts for someone matching this description, possibly tied to Colonel Hargrove's military or colonial past?" While waiting for Sir Henry's reply, Miss Marple decided to revisit Orchard House, hoping to catch Eliza alone. She arrived to find the manor quiet, with Victor still in London and Lydia out shopping. Eliza was in the garden, weeding with a distracted air. "Miss Marple," she said, brushing dirt from her hands, "it's kind of you to visit again." Her voice was soft, but her eyes darted nervously. Miss Marple smiled. "I was thinking about the Colonel, dear. Did he ever mention an old friend? From his army days, perhaps with a scar on his cheek?" Eliza's hands froze, and she looked away. "Uncle didn't talk much about the past, but there was a man, Captain Randall, who wrote to him sometimes. I never met him, but Uncle said he was trouble, a gambler, always in debt." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. A name at last. "Did this Captain Randall ever visit?" she asked. Eliza shook her head. "Not that I know of, but Uncle kept a trunk of old letters in the attic. They might mention him." Seizing the opportunity, Miss Marple asked to see the attic, citing an interest in family history. Eliza led her upstairs to a dusty space filled with crates and cobwebs. Among the Colonel's belongings was a battered trunk, unlocked but heavy. Inside, Miss Marple found bundles of letters tied with string. She sifted through them discreetly, finding one from a Captain James Randall, dated a year ago. It was brief, demanding repayment of an old debt and hinting at valuable information about the Hargrove estate. The tone was threatening, and Miss Marple slipped the letter into her satchel, promising to return it later. Back at Danemead, Sir Henry called with news. "Jane, your scarred man is likely James Randall, a former captain in Hargrove's regiment. Dishonourable discharge years ago. Gambling, fraud, you name it. Last seen in London, mixed up with shady moneylenders. Be careful, he's not the sort to trifle with." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind piecing together the puzzle. Randall's connection to Victor, his presence in the village, and his letter to the Colonel suggested he was after the codicil, perhaps to blackmail the family or settle his debts. As evening fell, Raymond burst in, his face flushed. "Aunt Jane, I saw Victor at the station, just back from London. He was with a man, tall, scarred, looked like trouble. They were arguing, and the man handed Victor a package before storming off." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Randall was here, and the package could be the stolen metal case, or something new. The web was tightening, with Randall as a key player, possibly the shadow in the orchard. Sitting by her fire, Miss Marple considered her next move. Randall's involvement explained Victor's agitation, but did he pull the trigger, or was he manipulating Victor? Eliza's mention of the attic letters and Lydia's key still nagged at her. Were they complicit, or merely caught in the crossfire? The scarred stranger had brought the mystery into sharper focus, but danger was closing in. Tomorrow, she resolved, she would track down Randall's movements in the village, determined to unmask the killer before the moonlit orchard claimed another secret. Chapter 9. The Confrontation. The twilight sky over St. Mary Mead was streaked with crimson, casting an eerie glow over the village as Miss Jane Marple prepared for a pivotal evening. The scarred stranger, Captain James Randall, had emerged as a central figure in the murder of Mr. Poole. His connection to Victor and the threatening letter to Colonel Hargrove pointing to a scheme rooted in greed and betrayal. The package Raymond saw Randall hand to Victor at the station was a fresh clue, and Miss Marple suspected it might hold the stolen metal case or evidence tying Randall to the crime. With the codicil safely hidden in her desk, she decided to confront the Hargrove family at Orchard House, hoping to provoke a reaction that would reveal the killer. She slipped on her coat, tucked her notebook into her satchel, and set out, her resolve as steady as the village clock's chime. Orchard House was ablaze with lights, a stark contrast to the darkened orchard beyond. Miss Marple knocked, and Eliza opened the door, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Miss Marple, it's late," she said, but stepped aside. Inside, the drawing room was tense. Victor stood by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, his eyes bloodshot. Lydia sat on a velvet chaise, her key necklace glinting as she sipped from a tumbler. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, and Miss Marple sensed an opportunity. "I've come to discuss something troubling," she began, her voice calm but firm. "A man named Captain Randall has been seen in the village, asking about your family. I believe he's tied to Mr. Poole's death." Victor's glass froze mid-air, and Lydia's hand tightened around her tumbler. Eliza gasped, her eyes darting to Victor. "Randall," Victor said, his voice hoarse. "That old crook. He's got nothing to do with us." But his knuckles whitened, betraying his unease. Miss Marple pressed on. "I have a letter from him to your uncle, demanding payment for information about the estate. And Victor, you were seen with him at the station, receiving a package." Lydia's eyes narrowed. "What's this, Victor? Keeping secrets with lowlifes?" Victor slammed his glass down. "It's none of your business, Lydia. Randall's just a business contact, nothing more." Miss Marple turned to Eliza. "And you, dear, did you know Randall was in touch with the Colonel?" Eliza's hands twisted in her lap. I saw his name in Uncle's letters, but I never met him. He sounded dangerous." Her voice trembled, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of calculation in her eyes. Lydia, meanwhile, stood abruptly, her necklace catching the light. "This is nonsense," she snapped. "You're stirring up trouble, Miss Marple. I'm going to bed." As she moved past, Miss Marple noted the key's intricate design, a perfect match for a small lock, perhaps on the metal case. Sensing the confrontation had rattled them, Miss Marple excused herself, promising to return with news from the police. Outside, she lingered by the orchard gate, watching the house. A shadow moved near the well, and her heart quickened. Slipping into the trees, she saw a tall figure, Randall, his scar visible in the moonlight, digging frantically in the soil. He unearthed a small bundle, wrapped in cloth, and tucked it into his coat before vanishing into the darkness. Miss Marple didn't follow. She knew he'd be back, and confronting him alone was too risky. Returning to Danemead, she found Raymond waiting, his notebook brimming with new information. "Aunt Jane, I spoke to the station master again. Randall bought a ticket to London for tonight, but he's still in the village. Someone saw him near the Black Swan an hour ago." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Randall's digging suggested he was searching for the codicil, unaware she had it. The bundle he'd retrieved could be the metal case, or something else incriminating. But why was Victor meeting him? And what did Lydia's key unlock? She telephoned Inspector Craddock, sharing her suspicions about Randall and the package. "We're watching him," Craddock assured her. "Found his fingerprints on a glass at the pub. Matches a record for fraud. We'll pick him up tonight." Miss Marple thanked him, but her instincts told her the family was still hiding something. Victor's denial, Eliza's guarded answers, and Lydia's key pointed to a deeper collusion. The second gun, mentioned by the police, nagged at her. Had Randall fired it, or was it a Hargroves doing? As midnight approached, Miss Marple sat by her window, the moon casting shadows that mimicked the orchard's twisted branches. The confrontation had shaken the family, and Randall's presence was the spark that could ignite the truth. She suspected the killer was among the Hargroves, with Randall as a catalyst or accomplice. The bundle he dug up was the next piece of the puzzle, and she resolved to track him down before he fled. The village slept, but danger stirred in. The moonlight and Miss Marple knew the final act of this deadly drama was near. Chapter 10. The Moonlit Truth. The night settled over St. Mary Mead like a velvet curtain, the full moon casting a silver glow that mirrored the fateful evening of Mr. Poole's murder. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, the codicil and Colonel Hargrove's letter spread before her, their words a map to the killer's motive. Captain Randall's shadowy presence, Victor's evasions, Eliza's guarded demeanour, and Lydia's mysterious key had woven a complex web, but the bundle Randall had unearthed in the orchard was the final thread. Miss Marple knew the truth was within reach, and tonight she would gather the Hargroves and Inspector Craddock at Orchard House to unravel the mystery. With her shawl draped over her shoulders, she set out, the weight of justice steadying her steps. Orchard House was ablaze with lamplight, its windows glowing against the dark. Inspector Craddock had agreed to Miss Marple's request for a meeting, and the family was assembled in the drawing room, their faces a mix of dread and defiance. Victor stood by the mantel, his jaw tight. Eliza sat rigidly, her hands clasped. Lydia lounged with forced nonchalance, her key necklace glinting. Craddock, stern but attentive, stood by the door, while Raymond hovered eagerly, notebook in hand. Miss Marple took her place in an armchair, her voice calm but commanding. "Thank you for coming," she began. "The murder of Mr. Poole has torn this village apart, but tonight we'll uncover the truth." She started with the codicil, producing it from her satchel. This document, hidden in the orchard's well, was the Colonel's final wish. It grants Eliza the house if she stays in St. Mary Mead, and divides the import business among you three if you work together. Mr. Poole was to reveal it, but someone ensured he never would. Victor's eyes flickered, but he said nothing. Eliza's lips trembled, and Lydia's fingers tightened on her glass. Miss Marple turned to Victor. "You were in debt, Victor, your business failing. You argued with Poole about money, and a telegram warned you he knew too much. You met Captain Randall, a man from your uncle's past, who demanded payment for silence about the codicil. You saw it as a threat to your inheritance." Victor's face reddened. "That's nonsense. Randall's a crook, yes, but I didn't kill anyone." She shifted to Eliza. "You cared for the Colonel, but you knew about the codicil's terms. Staying here for 5 years, tied to this house, was a burden you didn't want. You sent a letter to a London solicitor, perhaps to contest it, and you were seen near the inn, watching Poole." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "I only wanted to protect Uncle's wishes. I didn't hurt anyone." Finally, Miss Marple faced Lydia. "And you, Mrs. Forbes, with your key. It opens a safe in the Colonel's study, doesn't it?" The safe held the metal case Poole received, containing proof of Randall's debts to the Colonel, debts that could ruin him. You saw a chance to profit, perhaps by blackmailing Randall or Victor. Lydia laughed bitterly. "You're clever, but that key's just a trinket. I'm no killer." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "The truth lies in the orchard. 2 guns were fired that night. One killed Poole, the other was a blank, a distraction. Randall was there, digging up a bundle, a decoy case to mislead us. But the real case was already taken. She paused, letting the tension build. Lydia, you took it from Poole's room, using your key. You knew its contents could control Victor and Eliza, securing your share. But Randall, your accomplice, betrayed you. He fired the blank to create chaos, while you shot Poole with the Colonel's revolver, believing it would pin the blame on Victor. Lydia's face paled, her hand clutching the key. "That's absurd," she cried. But Craddock stepped forward, holding a cloth-wrapped bundle, the real metal case, recovered from Lydia's room after a tip from Miss Marple. Inside were documents detailing Randall's debts and a note from Lydia to him, promising payment for his silence. "We arrested Randall this evening," Craddock said. "He confessed to the blank shot but named you as the shooter, Mrs. Forbes." Eliza gasped, and Victor swore under his breath. Lydia stood, her composure crumbling. "I didn't mean to kill him," she whispered. "Poole was going to expose the debts, cut me out. Randall said we could scare him, but the gun—" It went off. Tears streamed down her face as Craddock handcuffed her, leading her away. Miss Marple sighed, the weight of the truth settling. Victor's greed had drawn Randall in, Eliza's loyalty had blinded her, but Lydia's desperation had pulled the trigger. The codicil, now safe, would guide the estate's future, though the family's bonds were shattered. As the police left, Raymond whispered, "Aunt Jane, you're a marvel." She smiled faintly. "Just an old woman who listens, dear." Back at Danemead, the moon hung high, its light softer now. Miss Marple locked the codicil away, her heart heavy but satisfied. St. Mary Mead would heal, but the orchard's shadows would linger. If you've enjoyed this tale, please like and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. The mystery is solved, but the human heart, as Miss Marple knew, would always hold new secrets.